On today's show, what to expect from Ryan Leonard in the 2025-2026 season.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the strength on the Capitals blue line and a new addition last summer in Matt Roy, the quiet strength on the blue line that Matt Roy brings. A bit later, we'll talk about Tom Wilson, the monster, returns as far as stats. A breakout season for good old number 43. What can we expect from him in 25-26? But just to get it going here, prime time Leonard. Is it going to be Ryan Leonard's time to take it to the next level in the 2025-2026 season? I think it is. And, people are going to say, you take a look at what he did last season towards the end of the season, and maybe he's not as good as we had hoped. Before I even want to dive into this segment, I want to make it abundantly clear that we can't judge a player that jumped from the NCAA to the NHL playoffs and think that is what kind of player they're going to be. And, just because he didn't light it up in the goal scoring department, that he's not going to be able to do that at some point. So let's dive into that. The very latest with Ryan Leonard, the player, Spencer Carberry, his thoughts and where he will slot in and what to expect from him in this upcoming season here. And talking about Leonard, his jump from college to the NHL. And this is what I'm talking about. It's important to remember that it basically happened overnight. I mean, he went from the NCAA tournament right into the playoffs. And I wasn't too concerned. To an extent, I thought to myself, maybe he is going to come here. Maybe he is going to score a bunch of goals. But I think it's important, as I reflect back on that was kind of an unrealistic expectation that I think maybe I had for him, or maybe some other Capitals fans had for him. But Spencer Carberry, he was not thinking that all. Spencer Carberry wasn't expecting fireworks. And he said it flat out. He said, quote, "Who expected him to score? Because that wasn't my expectation at all," unquote. And of course, I mean, it would have been nice if he would have scored more goals. He had that one empty netter in his time here. But, and I'll touch on this a little bit later. I think that once he has a full season, a full training camp, and not, jumping, back to Boston College, that he's going to fully concentrate on his season that's coming up with the Capitals. I think we can see big things from him next season. And honestly, it wasn't about numbers. He finished with just one empty netter in 9 regular season games, added 1 assist in 8 playoff games. But, like I said, ultimately that wasn't the goal. The goal was to get him acclimated to NHL hockey. And what better way to do it than in the playoffs? And you take a look at the Capitals, they were looking for, some potential goal scoring. And, I know Spencer Carberry said that wasn't his expectation, but let's be clear here. I think that the hope was anyway that he wasn't going to score a bunch of goals. I think they were hoping that he would have scored more than 1 empty netter. Taking a look at it, this was an experience about understanding the speed and the grind of the game, about getting comfortable with Carberry's systems and the locker room. It's a big change from the NCAA to the NHL, and he wanted him to be prepared. And getting a feel for the NHL playoff hockey is all about. That, you take a look at it, like I say, he did many great things, back-to-back 30-goal seasons at Boston College, all that he accomplished on the international stage, that is ultimately, I think, why he was fast-tracked to the NHL. And GM Chris Patrick said it perfectly. He said, quote, "It's like starting from not even at square one," unquote. That it's much different. The players are that much bigger. They're faster. They're stronger. And, like I said, Leonard did play well at Boston College, but a lot different once you get dropped into the pressure cooker that is known as the NHL. And look, Leonard's resume before arriving with the Capitals speaks for itself. We don't need to stand up for him. Just take a look at the back of his hockey card. Back-to-back 30-goal seasons at Boston College. First guy to do that in over a decade. A guy that was picked 8th overall, and the Capitals have high hopes in him, and he is going to be one of the future faces of this team, one of the pillars, in my opinion. Big frame. I think he's still growing into it. When I draw comparisons to Tom Wilson, people are quick to point out that he's not as filled out as Tom Wilson, and Tom Wilson himself wasn't as filled out when he was first drafted. That I think that Ryan Leonard is going to grow into that frame, and he does. He still has a bit of snarl to his game as well. But the accomplishments, like I say, back-to-back 30-goal seasons, Hockey East Player of the Year, Hobey Baker finalist. It was definitely worth a look. And captain of Team USA at the World Juniors, led him to back-to-back golds and took home tournament MVP. So quite a bit, a lot of accomplishments that he got done. And what has me even more excited about what he is going to bring next season. I started off this segment talking about, that he didn't light it up in the goal scoring department right away. Make no mistake about it. Next season, it is all going to be about offensive contributions. And again, I'm not saying that he's going to have to do it right out of the gate. In his first 10 games, he's going to score a goal in every game. I'm just trying to create realistic expectations. But, when you take a look at him, this guy is built for big moments. Playing at Boston College, it's not like playing at a small school. That is a hockey hotbed, and playing on the international stage, and for him being built for those big moments, he plays hard. He hits. He's got a rocket of a shot. Make no mistake about it. The Capitals got one heck of a hockey player that is going to change this team for years and years to come. But more than that, he's got that compete, that fire. That's not, you can't teach a player. You either have it or you don't. And he is the ultimate competitor. And I think that is what is going to make him a very, very exciting player to watch in the future. But it's early, and if last season is any indicator, I have him penciled into the third line role to start the year. But again, it depends on how he plays, who's up the chart from him there. If you want to talk about, let's say, right wing, you got, we've seen Protas and Wilson play over there as well, that, you could move some of those players around. And if Leonard, develops into the player that we think he is capable of being, then I think he could ultimately even get slotted higher. But right now, loosely sketched, I'm saying third line. But don't be surprised, like I say, if he earns more ice time, as Spencer Carberry, as well known for awarding players that really contribute to move him around, to get him more ice time. However, that has to happen. Especially with how thin the secondary scoring is. And, you even saw that with Beauvillier. I don't think there was any grand plans of him playing on that top line with Alex Ovechkin and Strome. So, I think there's going to be some mixing, some matching from Spencer Carberry. And just because what we see in the beginning of the season isn't what it's going to be for the duration of the season. So the big thing is, and, what's your projection? 15 goals, 20 goals. I'm going to try to create somewhat realistic expectations. And, I'm going to scale him back a little bit, right? It's his first year. I'm going to say that he is going to score 15 goals. That's setting it a little bit low, I think. Honestly, he could far surpass that, but just based on, his first full season in the NHL, I could see like around 15 goals. Again, I would absolutely love for him to far surpass that. I guess it remains to be seen. Power play minutes. How is that? Where's he going to fit in with all of that, as well as they do have a dynamic goal scorer? And, part of that picking 15 goals is, if he is playing on the third line, a lot of it depends on where it shakes out, right? I think that, of course, if he slots higher, if he's getting more playing time, then obviously the chances of him scoring more goals is that case. But, make no mistake about it. One dynamic player, like I said, and I think that we just saw the tip of the iceberg with Ryan Leonard and that brief snippet. If you want to generalize what kind of hockey player he is, why not take a look at some of the highlight footage at Boston College and on the world stage? One heck of a hockey player that's going to change hockey in DC for years to come. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Tom Wilson, the return of the monster. Prepared to be spooked. Straight ahead. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. And the thing I love about Monarch Money is you can see where you're spending your money wisely and maybe where you're spending your money poorly. In some cases, I see that I'm saving some money. I'm saving some money for retirement. And then there's things I need to work on, splurging on weekend trips or going out to eat or food delivery. Those aren't so good. Monarch Money helps you with all of those things. They kind of help you assess your money, if you will. And if you have a significant other in your life, you can try to plan your financial future together so you can live in harmony, in financial harmony. And you can do that with Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in segment 2 here, we're talking about the return of Tom Wilson, the monster, just really fully engaged, scoring goals, some of the best hockey we have seen Tom Wilson play. He played last season. And what is it about? What is the biggest part of his success last season versus previous seasons? I think it's pretty easy to understand. He didn't spend so much time worrying about fighting. He knows who he is. He understands that he is best served playing on the ice. He doesn't have to answer the bell to everyone. He is at the point in his career now, and just based on his fighting history and his being known for being a physical player, that sometimes he just has to skate into the vicinity. But make no mistake about it, his blood still burns extra hot in certain situations. If we think about the crybaby thing or all the different almost comical things that we've seen from Tom Wilson when he's extra irritated, that there is still that aspect, but I think he's leaning more into what he's really good at, and that is scoring goals. And I know the rest of the NHL doesn't like to hear that. They want to pigeonhole him and paint him into a corner as just being this tough guy, this single-dimensional player. Make no mistake about it, multi-dimensional, goal scorer, physical, the complete package. Let's dive into that in segment number 2, talking all things Tom Wilson and big 4-3, 43, and big bounce back for Tom Wilson. 33 goals, first 30-goal season of his career. He actually scored more this year than he did the last 2 seasons combined. Let that be known. NHL out there, NHL at large. We know what he means for the Capitals, but, just let that message really permeate and go all out into the NHL that Tom Wilson is not who you think he is. One heck of a hockey player. And look, it wasn't just about goals. That would be enough. He posted career highs in assists, power play points, game winners, OT goals, you name it, he did it. If you are a Capitals fan and you are not on the hype train, what are you waiting for? And I don't think there's a lot of you out there. And even with the penalty minutes, we're down 100, still high, but better than the 133 of the previous year. And, it's all about proper utilization. And I sing the praises of Spencer Carberry all the time because he deserves it. He put together a perfect line that we saw primarily with Connor McMichael, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Tom Wilson. And wow, that was magic. That was a genie in a bottle that they let out. And it was magic for Connor McMichael, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Tom Wilson. But he had really great chemistry with Tom Wilson. And all things considered, that line just worked. What worked? They brought physicality, they cycled well, and Wilson finally had a center who could feed him in the slot. I wouldn't mix that up, and Connor McMichael is a bit of a wild card if he goes down to third line center. But if they, say LaPierre works at third line center, I would not be opposed to keeping the band together on the second line, as it was absolutely knockout last season. Now, like I said, the big question, and if you're an everydayer of Locked On Capitals, I've spoke about it ad nauseum, is who is going to round out that line if, in fact, Connor McMichael goes down. If he's not, is it Connor McMichael? Is it Alexei Protas? What we know is McMichael brings a little more pace and shot volume. Protas, of course, brings size, puck protection, and board work. Personally, I would like it to be Protas and stick on that line at least to start. And then, we can change it up a little bit. Like I talked about in the first segment, we don't need to be married, or have this expectation that just because this is, the lineup for the game one of the regular season, that's how it's going to be for the duration. It's rather silly to think that way, but the thing we know for sure is Tom Wilson played so well on that second line. And not to say that he couldn't have done better on a different line, but that in particular was lights out. And if you want to talk about a game changer, I'm talking more specifically about the first round against the Canadiens. Wilson was a beast. He let go that monster that was inside, laid out Alexander Carrier with a massive hit against Montreal, turned the whole series around. Do you guys remember that? That there was a lot of questions, about, hey, it was supposed to be so easy against the Canadiens. And to be clear here, they had quite a bit of pushback. And you take a look at it, Wilson was huge. Added 3 goals, 7 points in 10 games, second only to Dylan Strome in postseason scoring. So Mr. Clutch, that is what he is. So, the question is, was this a one-off, or is this a sign of what is going to come from Tom Wilson next season and in the seasons to come? Personally, I think that he is evolved. I think he's mature. Like I said, I don't think he feels like he needs to answer the bell for every tough guy out there. And I think this version of Tom Wilson is here to stay. Older, smarter, and still physically dominant. And hey, if Ovi steps away after this season, you're looking at the next future captain. I don't really think that's up for debate. We know what kind of leader he is. The current captain of the team, Alex Ovechkin, has said as much as he thinks that Tom Wilson would be another great captain, or the next captain, rather. Here. I have said that for years and years on this show. But ultimately, what are your expectations for Tom Wilson next year? Do we think another 30-goal season? I think that is in order. I really do. Hit me up on Twitter at DanCaps218 on YouTube or at Locked On Caps on Twitter as well. I think that he's going to continue to take steps forward. I do expect him to hit that 30-goal mark yet again. I don't see him taking a step back. So unless, I always like to think of caveats or exceptions to that rule would be is if he faces a major injury. But if he's full go and plays the full season, I expect him to be 30 plus goals. Again, exciting that even though he's getting older, I know he's not an old guy on the team, but sometimes players play their best in their younger-ish days. That he's just hitting his stride when he is the most mature, and I think ultimately sees the lay of the land the most easy. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Matt Roy. Quiet strength on the blue line. There was some good. There was some bad. I'll break it all down straight ahead. We've all been there before, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with stress or ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting tickets for concerts even faster than easier. Before, prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime. And you can save up to 60% with their killer last-minute deals. Tired of endless scrolling trying to find the best deal? Game Time Zone Deals pick the best seats for you in your section. Ever wonder what the view will look like before you buy? The app shows you panoramic seat views, so there are no surprises. So take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the final segment of today's show, we're talking about Matt Roy and a quiet leader on the blue line for the Capitals. Not a showboat. A guy that kind of quietly goes about his business, and the surprise about Matt Roy this past season as we saw a bit of an uptick in his offense, something that wasn't necessarily known as one of his strong suits. He was more of just that stay-at-home defenseman in years before, but truly, I think turned out to be a pleasant addition to the Capitals' blue line, as it was pretty rock solid all season, and Matt Roy definitely fit the bill and was exactly what the doctor ordered going into last season. So in the final segment, let's talk about the man himself, Matt Roy. Talk about a guy that absolutely played a key role. We know signed last summer, 5.75 AAV. And while he's not flashy, he's steady, he's dependable, and a little bit of snarl. We saw a little bit of physicality out of Matt Roy last year. Not necessarily drop the mitts, but, he's not getting pushed around, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And he was exactly what the Capitals needed on the right side. Now, let's talk about numbers here for a second. His CF percentage, REL, that's Corsi for percentage relative to teammates, was actually the lowest among the regular Caps defensemen at negative 3.33%. And if you're wondering what is CF percentage, it's an advanced stat that measures shot attempt differential at even strength. So basically, it looks at how many shot attempts are generated for for versus against when a player is on the ice. And if your CF percentage is above 50%, you're spending more time in the offensive zone. If it's lower, the other team is probably controlling play more than when you're out there. So yeah, Roy struggled a bit in that area. But, with everything, oftentimes, and I don't like to go stat heavy. I really don't, because, I try to think of this show as more of a casual Cap fan, or, a Capitals fan, but maybe not a guy or girl that's just diving, head first into the stat pool, because sometimes stats can lead you astray. They're good to glean certain information, but you got to know the full scope of it. So context in some of this: he got hurt in the season opener, missed the next 10 games. That was a rough way to start. Once he came back, he played with Faravari. We also saw him play with Sandin. And while they weren't dominant, they held their own. Only Chychrun and TVR spent more time together at even strength. So offensively, Roy was sneaky productive. Again, I did not have that on my bingo card to start last season. I didn't. Career best assist rate, best points per game clip of his career. He's not a power play guy, but he chipped in more than expected. A pleasant surprise. And, a kind of, an unsung hero might be a little bit strong, but I think that he was better than some people perceived, because this summer, when I talked to people, fans of the show or whatever the case might be, just random Capitals fans on Twitter, I guess is what I should say, is that, oftentimes they mentioned that he should be a player that was dealt. And I often thought to myself, did he do something wrong? I guess I didn't see it. I thought he was pretty lights out for the Capitals. He also, the thing about him I like is he keeps things simple, clears the puck, wins board battles, block shots, the little stuff that doesn't always show up in the highlights, and sometimes doesn't show up in the statistics as well. Block shots, those kind of things, but it's winning board battles, those kind of things that I think oftentimes get overlooked. And when you look at the players, sometimes it's the flashier players on the blue line. I'm talking Chychrun and Carlson, players that can chip in, offensively big time. And, Marty Faravari throwing his body around some big hits that, I think unless you're a guy that just really makes your presence known, you don't get really noticed. And in Matt Roy's case, him not being noticed is a good thing, because if he stands out, that could be standing out that he's not playing well. And all things considered, I like what I saw from him last season. So the question is, who is he paired with next season? Do we see him with Faravari, Sandin? It's all going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out. Of course, we know that we have Declan Chisholm in the mix as well, who's most likely going to be an extra, but I don't see a lot of changes on the Capitals blue line next season, unless there's injury, or if Chris Patrick surprises, everyone, and acquires a truly big name player. They should kind of do it, and I've talked about this on the show, that they should have their eyes set, because, Matt Roy has been a good addition and that kind of thing. There's questions out there about Carlson and TVR being that they're entering into contract years. But big picture, talking about Roy here, overall, I think Roy delivered exactly what the Capitals were hoping for. A stable, no-nonsense second pairing defenseman that played very well for the Capitals last season. Certain things he can't control, being injured, that wasn't on him. But big picture, I like what I saw from Matt Roy. And again, I expect him to just do what he did last season, continue to knock it out of the park, kind of quietly, go about his business, not be noticed, kind of, Nick Backstrom vibes, if you will, and just really do some great things. But all things considered, I like Matt Roy's game, and I can expect his game to grow even more next season. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Washington Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts. and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.